Good evening. Welcome to the River Falls Municipal Utility Advisory Board meeting for Monday, July 23rd, 2018. Could we have the roll call, please?
Swanson. Here. Richter. Odine.
Here.
Mashevsky.
Here.
Toom. Spafford.
Here.
Wells Mangold.
Here.
We're looking for the approval of the minutes from the June 18th, 2018 meeting.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same. Minutes are approved. And now is the time for public comments, and we're going to keep those to public comments that are not related to the TRC relicensing report. So if you have anything that pertains to something else, that would be a great time to talk about it.
Mr. President, I have something. I would like to publicly thank the River Falls Municipal Utility for sending me to the American Public Power Association National Conference last month. That's why I wasn't at this meeting. In New Orleans, Louisiana. There were about 1,700 people there from all around the country, and I heard speakers on cybersecurity, new regulation developments in D.C. We had a futurist talk to us about 6 megatrends that we can look for in the future, and he specifically talked about trends in transportation and how that might affect utilities. And also I met an assistant city manager from Fort Collins, Colorado, who talked about community fiber and how Fort Collins has used the utility to provide internet service to that city. So, and I heard a lot of other things too, networked with a lot of people, and just wanted to thank the utility for the opportunity.
Great.
Press, Diane.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any public comments right now? We'll move on to the consent agenda, which is the acknowledgement of the West Central Wisconsin Biosolids Facility Commission report or minutes and the Powerful Choices Committee meeting from last month.
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor of approval say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same. Consent agenda is approved. New business is a resolution amending the municipal code regarding our elected positions on the utility board.
I'm just going to give a little bit of background on that. Our city clerk, Amy White, noticed that we have a secretary position, but our secretary position really didn't take the notes and minutes from the meeting. Lene Nelson, our assistant here, she does that. She said maybe we should clean that up and then make a vice chair instead of a secretary signing off. So Jason Roloff, our intern here, went through the process and created the memo and resolution for you to consider moving to a vice chair instead of a secretary. So, and that is recommended by our city clerk, Amy White, and Jason followed through on that. So that's what that's about. We would vote on the resolution tonight, but we won't vote for that position until there's a 30-day notice in effect, which will take us to next month.
Okay. Does anybody have any feelings on this discussion?
Is it vice chair or vice president?
Is it?
I think it's
Vice President.
It's listed as vice president.
Vice President.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sounds bigger.
So many committees and boards and chairs and presidents.
President. Yeah.
I will move, we approve the ordinance amending Chapter 2.64 Utility Advisory Board.
All those in favor of approval say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same.
Does that need to be a roll call vote? Because it's...
Let's do it just to be safe. Since this is ordinance.
Yes, it's an ordinance.
Swanson. Richter. Odine.
Yes.
Mashevsky.
Yes.
Toom. Spafford.
Yes.
Wells Mangold.
Yes.
All right. And then number 3 is the presentation from TRC.
I'll just give a little bit of background on this before we ask Leslie Brodkowski from TRC to come up and give a kind of a brief presentation of kind of an update of where we're at on our relicensing process. Leslie and I have had several phone conversations with FERC, including some of their federal attorneys on the phone conversation, and we have given them 3 options to look at to really fulfill the desires of the City Council from their resolution that council passed in late February regarding the wishes of City Council, the UAB, and the Kinney Corridor Committee, and how they like to see our river, our hydros, and our dams moving forward. That document is my guiding document and Leslie's guiding document to everything we're doing. These three options all accomplish what is asked for in that City Council resolution. The three options differ in some of the potential expenditures to get accomplished what is in the resolution, and we've presented those to FERC, and Leslie is going to give the update. I won't steal all of your thunder.
Thank you, Kevin. All right. Well, thank you all for having me here. It's been a joy to work with you all at the City of River Falls. I've been working with you all on and off, but we're just now starting the process of relicensing the hydros, as Kevin said, using the resolution as our guidance document. Background, you guys are pretty much all familiar with this, but I just wanted to run through it in case there's anyone here who's not. So there's two hydroelectric facilities on the Kinnickinnic River, Junction Falls and Powell Falls. You last received your 30-year license from FERC back in 1988 for the operation of the hydros. The city initiated relicensing back in 2013. It's my understanding you started off the process thinking you'd move forward without a lot of opposition or problems or questions, but then it was brought up that some people in the community thought it might be a good idea, instead of relicensing the hydros, to look at removing one or both of those hydros. At that point, the city requested and did receive a 5-year license extension from FERC so they could go through a river corridor planning process, which you are doing. It's almost done, but you're all pretty familiar with what's gone on with that. But you, as a city, wanted to really take that time to look at the options of not only the FERC license with the hydros, but the river corridor as a whole. And obviously, the hydroelectric facilities do play a role in that process. So the current FERC license expires August 31st of 2023, which means we need to be working now on relicensing of those facilities. So it takes about 5.5 years to get through a relicensing process. So the first set of documents that we need to submit to FERC are due no later than August 31st of this year. As I mentioned, the Kinney Corridor Committee has gone through, or the Kinney Corridor process has gone through, and the Kinney Corridor Committee did recommend the removal of one facility and the relicensing of a second facility. The city did pass a resolution in February of 2018, and basically, kind of the short summary of that is ultimately the community decided they wanted a free-flowing Kinney, and this would be the last relicensing process that you would undertake with FERC. Target removal dates, as outlined in that resolution, are removal and restoration of Powell Falls by 2026, and removal and restoration of Junction Falls between 2035 and 2040. So the staggered removal of the hydros does present somewhat of a unique situation, at least as far as FERC terms are concerned. So, a lot of times with relicensing projects, there's, one hydro project under a license. It's not uncommon to have more than one facility under one license number. That in itself isn't that uncommon. But the staggered removal is a little bit unique. And then also the timing of that is something that when I was looking at the wording of the resolution, I knew that we were planning on having Powell Falls coming out sooner than later, but I wasn't as familiar Junction Falls would be coming out quite as soon. So when I was looking at that, I was like, well, maybe there's, within the bounds of the FERC process, is relicensing the best route to go? Or should we look at some potential alternatives to still meet the objectives that were outlined in that city resolution? So with the target removal of Junction Falls, the way it's set right now, you'd be removing that facility between 12 and 17 years after you get a license from FERC, going through the licensing process. Legally, FERC cannot issue a license for less than 30 years. It's mandated by law. They cannot issue a license for less than 30 years. But license surrender, on the other hand, is generally implemented pretty quickly after you submit the application. So again, looking 12 to 17 years out for a license surrender is also something FERC doesn't typically do. Obviously, FERC it's a big federal bureaucracy, so they have their very strict rules and regulations and guidelines. So we were, again, looking at the situation, trying to think of the best possible way to meet what you've outlined in your resolution within the bounds of the FERC process. So we said, okay, well, let's talk to FERC. We know what the city ultimately would like to do based on the resolution and the corridor planning process. So we talked about 3 potential options to see if that would be a possibility with FERC. So we talked about a FERC license extension request, and I'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail. A license surrender with a delayed effective date, and then the original process that we'd all talked about, which was relicensing using the integrated licensing process. So the idea with the FERC license extension request, essentially, right now you have a 30-year license, you've already gotten a 5-year extension, so you could get up to 15 more years before you reach the ultimate maximum license term, which is 50 years. It's not possible to have a license for more than 50 years. So the idea with that was it would allow for the continued operation of Junction Falls, at least up to 2038, while acknowledging that you want to decommission and remove both facilities. So when we talked to FERC about this, we actually had 2 meetings. First, we called and talked to them and kind of pitched the different ideas and talked about the pros and cons of each. And then they actually wanted to, the week later, have a meeting where they all talked internally amongst themselves. So there was a number of staff from FERC on the call. They brought in their FERC general counsel and basically reviewed the options and kind of talked about the pros and cons. Can we actually do this within the bounds of what we have legally able to do? And then met with them a week later. And basically the response that we got the week later is what we have here. So from FERC, they basically said, no, this is not a viable option. And FERC staff view, the project already received a license extension. There's certain reasons that they allow for extensions, and this really isn't one of them. So they're very unlikely to issue another extension for 15 years or otherwise. The other option that we talked about was a license surrender with a delayed effective date. And again, just wanting to put some certainty in the process, saying we want to operate Powell Falls for X number of years, Junction Falls for X number of years, and kind of outlining that staggered process. So instead of going through the relicensing process and then turning around very shortly after going through a surrender process for Junction Falls, we thought this was more of a streamlined approach where we can do it all under one application. So essentially that was what, our pitch as to why we thought that would be a good idea. And FERC's response for that was, again, didn't think it was a viable option. Again, due to that delay in the date for removing the second facility. So pretty much anything over, they've never issued a surrender for over 10 years. I think the closest was an example in Washington State that was maybe 6 years. So, and 15 years gave them way too much heartburn to be happy with. So basically FERC staff said, no, that's not a viable option.
So, one second. So is this the general counsel saying it's illegal and we can't do this, or is this staff at FERC saying we don't want to do it?
So the meeting that was held was between FERC staff. So there's licensing staff and there's compliance staff. They're kind of in 2 different houses. So those were both at the table. Because if you go through a relicensing, you're dealing with the relicensing staff. If you go through a surrender, you're dealing with the compliance staff. So both were at the table right away. And those were the folks that were at our first meeting. I believe there were 4 people from FERC at our first meeting. And they in-house then met with those same people and then their in-house counsel, their legal counsel, basically the in-house FERC lawyers. And then I think 5 or so of those individuals were on the second call that we had with them.
Can I help answer that maybe a little better? So it's true what Leslie said, that they legally cannot issue a license for less than 30 years. That's a legal question. But it's also not really that precedented to give a community like ours a 5-year extension either, right? So they did that kind of outside of their box of norms. We thought we would try to push that box a little bit farther out to a 15-year And since we already did 5, we go, geez, we did 5, it really worked well for us, and that was part of our argument. Why don't we just do 15 years? The community spent 18 months coming together to come up with a solution that really was a nice compromise for our whole community, and we just want to fit that solution into your box, and they had a hard time with that. So they would come back to legally, they cannot issue a license for less than 30 years, so that's true on the legal side.
Right.
Potentially, you think there could be room for an extension, but they were not having it. And then someone just might ask, why not the extension? One of the main reasons they give is they don't want a precedent set. So if you set a precedent of giving a community an extension, others would be a lot then able to then point to, just as we're looking for a precedent setting, when we're trying to make our argument. And then you might say, well, why is that bad? Well, to that agency, that's not good. When there's a precedent set outside of the normal rules.
Right.
So whether or not that makes sense to you, that's their reasoning.
So they gave us a 5-year, which they've done for others. Have they ever given anybody another extension
The
after
fact
that?
that you got the 5-year was very rare
Very
to begin
rare.
with. And originally, I don't know if you remember, but the original request was denied.
Yes.
And the staff person who denied that, basically the next level, it went over his head and he was overruled. And that's why you got that 5-year extension. So,
It sounds to me like the short story is that we are much more creative as a city than FERC is as a commission.
Yes. I'll just say yes.
it is a federal agency. But yeah, so basically the conversations that we have, was with FERC staff, but it was also with their general counsel.
Okay.
So it
Thank you.
wasn't just the staff.
Thanks.
So, but yeah, basically, they haven't done it before, they really don't want to do it, so that was the answer that we got for that one. So the third option that we talked about was relicensing using the integrative licensing process. I won't get into detail of exactly what that means, but if you have questions about integrative versus others, let me know, we can go into that more later. But essentially with that process, and that's what we were thinking about doing originally anyway, so that's probably not really new to anyone in this room. But with that process, essentially you're going through the relicensing, acknowledging that we want to decommission and remove Powell Falls within that set deadline, while also continuing to operate Junction Falls. So that's what we would basically be outlining through the licensing process. And within that, we can acknowledge the fact that we're looking at removing Junction Falls in the future, but for now, the action that we're requesting from FERC with this process is a license to operate it. And at any point, when you have your license, you as a city, as the utility, can make a decision that you want to surrender it. That could be 5 years from now, it could be 10 years from now, it could, based on the resolution that we're sticking to, it's, about 17 years after you would get the license. So with FERC, the FERC response is they felt this was the only viable option. And part of why we had a question about this is, we know they cannot issue a license for less than 30 years. So we didn't want to go in and feel like we were being disingenuous saying, yes, we want to operate this for 30, 40 years, knowing that it based on the resolution, we want it to come out sooner. But based on the options that were presented, they felt this was the only viable option based on the legal parameters that they work within. So those are the conversations we had with FERC. So where are we, and why are we talking about it today? Some of the possibilities that we do have right now, we could request an official determination on the FERC process option alternatives. So we had, basically it was informal discussions with FERC staff. So it's not an official FERC decision on whether or not you could use any one of those 3 options in particular. But basically we talked quite at length with FERC staff and said, well, if we submit this, what's going to happen? They said, well, we'll review it, but who's going to review it? And basically the answer was the exact same staff and legal counsel that reviewed it before. So they said, we'll review it and we'll say no. You can basically
and the people we were
relicense.
talking to.
What's that?
And the people we were talking to on the phone.
Yes, yeah. So the same people that we talked to that gave us the staff opinion would be the same ones to give us the official determination. The next option would be essentially skip that step because we already know what answer we're going to get And you could go ahead and submit a FERC license extension request, again, for up to 15 years. And within that, basically, the reasoning for the extension request would be, we want to, basically outlining what is in the resolution, stating when you want to remove Powell and stating when you want to remove Junction Falls, and have that clearly outlined as to why you want the extension for 15 years. At that point, you wouldn't have a license for Junction Falls past 15 years because you'd be up to 50 years. But it gets you pretty close to what's in that range within the resolution. We also kind of played that out with FERC staff, and most likely we would get a no response from that as well. Because again, the same FERC staff and legal counsel will be reviewing it. Once you get that no, because it's pretty sure you'd get a no, you could petition it, but it's probably still going to be FERC staff looking at it. It's unlikely to go to the full commission, to the commissioners. It's possible, but even if it does, right now there's 4 commissioners. They just lost one. 2 are Democrats, 2 are Republicans. So I don't know if they would make any decision one way or the other. I don't know if Democrat versus Republican makes any difference anyway. But right now they're kind of at a stalemate with 4 commissioners total anyway. So if it were ever to get that high, which I'm not even sure it would because they have an awful lot on their plate, their answer would probably be no. I can't guarantee it would be a no, but again, it's just wanting to relay the potential options that are out there. So with both of those options, obviously it does cost, time and money to submit those requests. So it would be up to you of whether or not you wanted to play out those potential scenarios. If you were able to do the extension request, one of the benefits of that would be essentially, again, trying to do this all under one process versus relicensing and then turning around and submitting the surrender application thereafter. But, I think Kevin would agree, based on our conversation with staff at the end of the call, we were pretty sure we were going to get a no to any of those requests. So FERC's recommended path forward and in our TRC recommended path would be to move forward with relicensing using the integrative licensing process, and again, kind of using that, the staggered approach. So relicensing, describing the removal of Powell Falls, and then also the continued operation of Junction until the city decides they wanted to submit a surrender application for that facility.
Just to, someone might be wondering, how do we know they would say no? How do we know they would say no? Leslie and I weren't having to read between the lines in that conversation. So they would said no. If that came to us, that we would deny that.
Right.
That was that bull.
I have just a couple clarifying questions.
Yeah.
My understanding through this process is our hydro projects are extremely small in FERC's universe.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we're probably seen as this noisy little gadfly to begin with. But also, if we start the relicensing process and, circumstances were to change and we thought that maybe another option would be possible, would it be possible to shift tracks?
Yes.
Okay.
So basically, when you're at this point of a license, you have 2 options in the FERC world. You can relicense or you can surrender. Those essentially are your options. Right. So within the relicensing process, at any point, you could, as a community, say, we changed our mind, we want to surrender. The day after you get your license, you can turn around and say, we want to surrender. So at any point in that process, when you do have a license, you can choose to basically submit a surrender application. If we were to submit a surrender application and then 2 years from now say, never mind, we want to relicense, you can't really.
You can't go in that direction.
You can't go in that direction, so.
Okay, well, what about how long does the licensing process take?
The license, to go through relicensing process takes a minimum of 5 years.
Okay, so during that process, we could change our mind?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Or after you have your license, either way.
To go to surrender, but not from surrender back to.
Back to relicensing.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Just curious, with the FERC license extension request, even though it sounds like it was a no, if you wanted to go that route and try and go through all of the processes to see if anybody would say yes, how long does that take, and would we still be able to meet deadlines along the way, or how does that?
So if you wanted to play out that process, at this point, August 31st is coming very quick. So regardless, we need to submit a PAD and NOI. We can't meet that deadline. But tangentially, you could submit that amendment application. I think we'd get the first no from FERC staff fairly quickly, but I mean, quickly in FERC terms could be still months for sure. But then if you then petition it, again, depending on how high or how many times you wanted to petition it, again, I'm not sure would ever make it up to the FERC commissioners, because they not only deal with hydro, but they also deal a lot with pipeline projects. So you see those a lot in the news, even more so than hydro. So it could take years, but it could be, yeah. The first no would probably be relatively quick, based on what we obtained from the call with FERC staff. But again, depending on how far up the totem pole you're able to go. But I mean, in general, the FERC commissioners, again, if it were to ever get that high, are going to follow staff recommendations, because they're not going to spend a lot of time digging into details of a specific project. They're going to say, staff, what do you recommend? And
Sure. And you mentioned the cost, if you were to go down that road, like how costly is that if you continue to just get no's and versus just going with the recommended path of relicensing?
right. Well, I mean, with the recommended path of relicensing, essentially that's the set relicensing cost. To submit an application, it kind of depends how detailed you want it to be. So, we or the city or the combination could submit that amendment request. You do need to, for an amendment, you need to go through consult. So you'd want to consult with both agencies and stakeholders and get them on board first, ideally providing letters of support to then provide to FERC staff as backup. So you could submit that in a letter package, essentially, so it doesn't need to be, it's not anywhere near as big as a licensing package. If you wanted to dig really deep and really load the cannons and guns, you could call your congressman and get them to write letters, and you could hire a FERC attorney to dig through case law and see if there's any other precedent out there. To my knowledge, there's not, but I'm not an attorney. I don't pretend to be an attorney. So again, it kind of depends on how deep you want to get into it and how much you want to fight it. I mean, yeah, it could be a stepwise process if you wanted it to be.
So just for clarification, since I'm new on this, and thanks to Kevin for sending me some information through emails and stuff, I was able to brush up and be reminded of some past discussions. It looks like a relicense is 150 to 200,000, and a surrender was 250 to 400. So just for clarification, are we looking at those costs when we surrender Powell?
I know. So Powell will be in our first submittal. So we're going to, when we submit this first relicense, we're going to include the Powell decommissioning. Is that what we call
Yeah,
that?
so you decommission
Powell.
Decommission a facility and you surrender a license.
So
you don't
that would be that
surrender-
cost?
You won't surrender Powell until the license is ultimately
But Mark,
surrendered
we
for
will have to
junction.
go back in about 2030 to 2032 or 3
Mm-hmm.
and then do the process again for surrender.
Yeah.
But Leslie, we were talking earlier today and you said you think that process does go fairly quickly?
It can, and if we do the relicensing process, we're wanting to stick to what is in the resolution. So we can basically outline that process now and set the stage for the later surrender of Junction Falls, even though it's, 17 years down the road, 20, I guess, from now. So we can kind of make that a staggered approach, and, FERC, as long as FERC staff knows that's kind of the ultimate long-term goal, and, some of the studies could maybe be geared towards that as well. It's possible, once we get closer to that, they might want additional studies specifically looking at the removal of that facility, because in general, FERC is looking at a change of conditions. So they're looking at a change of conditions of what it is now versus what it's proposed to be. It's not looking at what it was 150, 200 years ago. So they'll probably still want some studies then, but it's certainly not going to be double the cost to do that. And the FERC regs are very specific about what you need in a surrender application for larger projects, but it's very wishy-washy and really doesn't have much of any detail for small projects. So again, if we can really do our homework up front, really set the stage and outline it, I think it'll go pretty smoothly when you get that far, especially if everyone on the community is on board and wants them to come out. If there's a lot of opposition, to the hydros coming out, then it can take longer and you need more studies and things like that.
So Mark, maybe to better answer your question for me just a little more clearly, I think this first 5 years is a couple $100,000 venture, give or take a little bit, to get this first part done. Then when we come up to it again, we're hoping that we can look forward with FERC in this first portion, and like Leslie said, do some of the studies now that might be required later. Also get stakeholders in the community on board for 2033 or 2032 in that area, so we can get that through relatively quickly and more easily without a lot of resistance. If everybody is in the same boat going the same direction at that point in time. So we want to limit those costs. I don't think that second round is going to be 400,000. It would be study dependent though. If something came up and there were more studies that had to be done, those type of things could raise the cost. But I think our consultant and internal type work should match about what we're doing now. And like Leslie said, it shouldn't be double unless the studies were
Right.
popped up. So I don't know if that helps you or not.
It does. And just one quick follow-up question. So the city council voted, the resolution is that no city funds will be used. And if there is an issue with collecting the money that needs to be collected to remove the falls and the resolution, to surrender, if there's an issue, is that being worked into this process? Because if I remember right, we're looking at 12 million or more to take both
there's some
out?
rough numbers. That's been thrown out there, anywhere from about 4 to 12. But
Okay, for both dams.
yeah, but I can't remember
The
if it
numbers
was
that you
both or just
guys-
one.
So you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah.
Is if there is an issue, I mean, to me, it makes sense. I agree with what they're proposing. But if there is an issue, I mean, this is a long ways out, and, there's an opportunity for these, groups to collect this money. Most likely they can, but if they can't, then where are we at? And I think that should be thought about during this discussion.
Yeah, I think it should be thought about. I think it's a little bit of a side issue in the fact that with the council's resolution to say it's going to happen, the future councils will have to deal with that when that point in time arrives. But we need to know today how we're going to proceed in 30 days, really, with this license, with this process. But that is an important issue, and that will be a community issue, and that will be a Diane and her city council issue.
Whoever city council is.
Whoever
then.
city council is at that point in time. But no, that's going to, that will be an issue. Or maybe not an issue. Hopefully not an issue.
Sure.
So, just so I understand, the ILP
Mm-hmm.
could be to relicense both facilities with the decommission included, happening when?
So let me clarify a little bit. So you have one license with FERC. There's 2 hydros under one license. So within the integrative licensing process, so through the relicensing process, we were proposed to continue operating, essentially relicense Junction Falls, but within that process, describe the removal of Powell Falls by 2026, is I believe the date for that one. So essentially, through the relicensing process, we're not proposing to continue to operate that one past when the removal would go in. So there is more that would need to go into this relicensing opposed, to a typical one, because we are going to need to to more fully describe what's going to happen with removal of Powell Falls. You'll need a decommissioning plan specific to that facility. You'll need to describe to FERC how you're going to decommission it, what studies you're doing to prove that it's not going to have a negative environmental impact, because they do an environmental assessment. They do the NEPA process through the FERC licensing process. So we're going to be looking at continuing to operate one and removing one, all within this one process.
Leslie, do you want to share with the group what staff's recommendation is through our consultant? Did you share that? Or?
Through our recommendation?
Yeah, our recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, essentially we propose these options to FERC saying, is there a better way to get from point A to point B within the guidelines of FERC? And essentially the answer they gave us was no. The only option we really see is relicensing, using whatever process you want, but relicensing. So, we saw some benefits, but again, through their guidelines, they don't think it's viable. So, yeah, at TRC, we recommend that basically that you do follow the staff recommendations and go through relicensing. I mean, you could play out those other options, but I think not just me, but, we think it would be essentially a waste of money by putting extra money to ask those questions to FERC, to have them come back and say no. Is there a chance they could say yes? Yes, but I think it's incredibly small that they would come back and say yes. So it really depends on how much you want to battle and play that game. So the path of least resistance definitely is to relicense.
I'm going to build on that too, just on a little softer side of that is, the people we're dealing with is a team of about 5 people at FERC. And I think it's important if we're going to go through a 5-year process with them, and we're going to want things from them. We want speed and accuracy and, helpfulness and cooperation. You're going to get that by
Taking their
capitulating a
advice.
little bit versus fighting them. So that's not a hard and fast, but I just throw it out there as a thought. I mean, they're people just like you and I, and you have that. So, and that no other, just to be aware.
Well, so the final decision on this doesn't rest with us; it rests with the city council. Then, correct?
I think the UAB is the utility commission. I also think that Leslie and I and our staff, with the support of Scott, I think we could have made this decision on our own. But I think this is important enough, and we wanted to give you folks an update anyway. But I think this decision, I thought maybe in this group here and with City Council tonight, they're going to get a chance to comment. Maybe there'd be an appetite for the different approach. And if there is, we would acquiesce our policymakers and do that. But I just wanted to make sure and feel very comfortable that you knew what we're doing. Everything's above board. We're trying to match the City Council's resolution. We're trying to do it in the most efficient, fair way to get accomplished what was written on that piece of paper in late February. And if you folks have an appetite for that path, for going down that road, but maybe taking a shortcut or a different way around, we would listen to that. But we did give you our recommendation, so it's up to you. Ultimately, it's up to staff, but I want the support of our policymakers as well to get it accomplished what we need to get accomplished. So, if that's fair. And I don't even have a resolution prepared tonight. More of a head nod. If you feel, so inspired to vote on one of these 3 options, that's fine too. But it's not necessarily necessary. I know Leslie feels confident in the licensing process route, and I know she's been through this. I feel confident it'll get accomplished what we want to get accomplished. You say, what are the downsides? The downsides is maybe that you have a 30-year license and a future council could take a different path or something. I mean, that is really the only downside, is whether if we would go to surrender with an extension, it defines it more clearly for all future councils. But this other one is going to get accomplished what we want. Council today could add to their resolution, I suppose, to put more teeth in it if they wanted to. But that's, the negative will be someone's going to stand up and they're going to say, well, see, you're licensing and it's going to keep going. That's not the intention, but that's the route FERC wants us to go.
Right, and there's just, FERC has its processes that it has to abide by, and, the city, the corridor process and the city council had, the parameters that they're looking at, so we're just looking at the best way to try to marry those things to ultimately try to help the city obtain the future that they wanted to for the corridor, again, within the bounds of the FERC process.
Does anybody have any questions for Leslie?
Just one real quick comment is, you shared with us in the past the resumes of the different companies that we could be working with, and I think we were all very, very happy with Leslie as the lead and TRC's history. It seems to me, I've studied this for the last month here, looking at it over and over and thinking about it, and it just seems like the right thing. We saw a change from a relicensing process to some opposition from the community, and we changed it in a couple of years. So, I mean, this could change again. We don't know. We don't know where this world is going and how costly, electricity is going to be and the consumption that we have. This may change again. We don't know. So I'm comfortable with TRC. I'm very comfortable with Leslie, and I'm good with
One thing, Mark, this recommendation by Leslie and our staff does, it matches the resolution exactly. The resolution says relicense with decommissioning of Powell by 2026. That's exactly what this will do. I think surrender would have been different. That might have been challenging in our community because that's not what it says. We would have accomplished the same thing,
right.
but that would have been a little twist. So,
Thanks.
Right, changing semantics, but also, yeah, yep. Yeah, again, ultimately trying to achieve the goal of what's outlined in the resolution, regardless.
Any other questions for Leslie or Kevin? All right. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll open it up to public comments on this topic. Is there a sign-up sheet? Okay. And if you could just, when you're done signing in, just state your name and city that you live in, would be great.
Robert Chambers, glad to be here tonight. Clifton Township, I live on the Kinney below the two dams. A couple things. First, on the money in the budget. I would have hoped to have seen from your consultant the costs to the city of the three paths, because I've been dealing with FERC since 1988. I was hoping to get the dams removed quite a bit earlier than 2026. So I've been dealing with FERC staff for quite a while on these sorts of issues about the city. And I've always heard, and even recently, that the most expensive path is relicensing, not the cheapest. And that doesn't even include having to do a surrender application at some time in the future for the license as well. So, I would prefer to have seen a report that actually gave you the costs of these three paths, projected costs, of course, down to the point of 2026 at least. Because I think there is some confusion here, and relicensing is, from my understanding, the most expensive path, not the cheapest path. This question about the cost of appeals that may be made, requests for a different sort of surrender with a time certain in the future. How much did the request and the appeals cost for our 5-year extension? Was it $10,000, $20,000? Or was it a few pieces of paper and a phone call? The city is batting 1,000 on its appeals with FERC. To not even ask, and it may be a free ask, could we surrender in 15 years? Without even asking, what have you gained? I think that path must be tested to know what FERC would say and what the cost might be. The initial ask, I think, is going to be the cost of a postage stamp, and not much more than that, a little bit of staff time. Mm-hmm. The second problem I see is the integrated licensing process, that path. FERC traditionally has two methods of licensing facilities for 30 to 50 years. One is the integrated path, which is the one FERC has recommended and your consultant has recommended you use. The other path is the traditional FERC licensing path. FERC prefers the traditional path, which has almost no public meetings, for those facilities that have no conflict, no worries about relicensing the dams in the community. FERC chooses to use integrated process when they know that there's some trouble in the community and the community is not united around one path. FERC comes in and mediates these meetings over the 5-year process. But I think, and I may be wrong, but I don't think I am, I think that if the UAB or the City Council decides to go for a 30-year license under the integrated path, that the carefully negotiated results of the Corridor Committee, which I think were a good result, are going to be thrown out. And both sides of the issue are going to think that they've got 5 more years to relitigate the process. So instead of saying tonight, the Corridor Committee, the City Council has done a good job, has united all these stakeholders behind a path that they can support, I think that an unintended consequence of going with the integrated path is going to be to stir up the hornet's nest and give the stakeholders 5 more years to relitigate. It is entirely possible that if it gets too acrimonious, that at the end of the integrated licensing path, FERC could deny the license. If they think that the community is not going to get behind these dams, then they could deny the license. We don't know if they'll do that. We won't know for 5 years. But why stir that hornet's nest, potentially not even get the 30-year license that you'd like to get? Why not go and have a free ask for one of the paths that follows the City Council's recommendations, that abides by the corridor committees and their stakeholders in their feelings and their guidance? So my advice would be to not go for integrated licensing process tonight. I think that it'll serve the utilities, the city, and the stakeholders better if you at least ask FERC for one of the other 2 options. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments on the issue? Okay. Yep. Can you keep it to 3 minutes?
Yeah, and I probably won't be as eloquent as Bob either. But Dave Drewiski, a resident of the town of Troy and executive director of the Kinney Land Trust. My fear when I read the advisory memos attached to your packet was that a lot of good work would have been thrown out that the Kinney Corridor Committee did. And it was truly a compromise, and I watched most of the process. And to play or add to Bob's comments, that if a situation is truly unique, are you really setting a precedent? This community has done some remarkable things, starting back in the early 90s, actually even before that, to protect the river, starting with waste treatment system upgrades, adopting some of the best shoreline protection and runoff standards in the state, and most recently, meeting the TMDL reduction limits into the lower St. Croix. This city also has a stream that's in the 1/10 of 1% of water quality, and one of the main drivers for the long-term health of the stream and preserving it for future generations is to maintain the cold water environment. So I'm going to second Bob's motion that I think you should at least ask, because like my dad always told me, if you don't ask, the answer is always no.
Thanks, Dave.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Judy Foster Babcock, long-term resident of River Falls, speaking tonight as an individual in the community. So I'd shared with this council back in December a letter that was addressed to the Corridor Planning Committee. It had some key points around the decision that was coming up. I'm really proud of this community, as Dave said, for the decision that was made, the compromise that was reached. I appreciate the city staff, especially in this utility area. It's working hard to try to bring the right recommendations for you to consider. I also appreciate the transparency that you're providing in this process. I will give a third vote and nod to the recommendation that Rob Chambers made. I really do think you need to explore all the options and use your creativity. Appreciate what you're doing and bring it forward for the community and eventually remove these dams to protect the health and longevity of this river. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm William Hanson.
Just sign in real quick.
Yeah, we'll sign in here. Town of River Falls. It's interesting that we have so many people that have of one mind, that have just one approach to what's going on here. One of the things I'm impressed with is the quality of the river. I like Lake George. I'm in favor of Lake Louise. I think the arguments that were made earlier about a waterfall and things, I love the appearance of our Junction Falls Dam and its quality. Our hydros are a valuable, renewable energy resource here in River Falls. You're talking a lot about the quality of the river, the quality of the trout. My understanding is that if you get a half a mile down the Kinney, it doesn't care anymore whether it came through a lake or not. The hydro production in 2017 was reduced by a number of factors, including substation changes, working with the XL Energy, and some other considerations, including the dam inspections, which it came through very well. If you look at the performance numbers for the full year of 2016, you'll find that our dams and hydros generated 2.1 million kilowatt hours of electricity. There was a total electrical sales from that electricity of over $200,000 with a total expenses of $80,000. Net revenue $125,000. This is a valuable community resource, and I don't think there's been an adequate case made for the renewable energy component that's being considered here. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Alison Page. I'm a citizen, I live in the city of River Falls, and I'm also the secretary for the Kinnickinnick River Land Trust. And my only thought is that the corridor planning process went as it did. I think everybody, would have thoughts on how it did or didn't go. But the one thing that I appreciated most that came out of it was the clarity of vision for the future of this community. And that's a free-flowing Kinnickinnick River free of dams. People disputed the different times and when and where, and kind of a compromise, as people have said, that one dam would come out first, one dam would come out later. My point would be, can we as a community and can our city council, as the governance of our community, afford that compromise? Now, I would just ask that you and the city council keep your eyes clear on the vision, a free-flowing river, and when and how can we make that happen in a way that is cost-effective for our community, and what are those best options? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments at all?
Hal Watson, City of River Falls, and council member. I appreciate where you're sitting right now, and it's a very kind of a tough decision, especially, thinking that maybe this isn't going to come before the council is something that I'm a little concerned about, given the importance of this topic. Excuse me. So this could be a big head nod or whatever you're going to do later on. I'd like to, I think you need to get really solid clarity here from your consultant or from our consultant on the expected cost to pursue full integrated licensing versus surrender with overwhelming support from the stakeholders. So we're kind of, and the reason why I say that is that if we go, one thing that FERC, as I understand from city staff, has said is that they don't want to be part of a settlement agreement. If there's going to be, we had in our resolution, the city's resolution, this idea of a settlement agreement, which would essentially lay out the parameters of the decommissioning of the dams. And the reason for that settlement agreement idea was to build trust between the stakeholders and the council and the UAB that the vision that that what was laid out in the city's resolution would actually take place over the course of the next 15, 17 years. And so with FERC kind of taking a settlement agreement off the table, we're kind of left in a situation where it's difficult to ensure, if given a 30-year license, how this is going to play out from the perspective of the stakeholders, from the perspective of the current city council. But we would know that we would have a 30-year license. And given that, without a formal agreement, I think the stakeholders, and I can't speak for them, but if I was a stakeholder, I would probably think, well, worst case scenario, these dams are going to be in for 30 years. I better ask for studies, mitigations, and all the things that would be expected in a 30-year licensing regime. So to me, that's where the cost of a full integrated licensing process begins to really show its ugly head. In that, and as I recall from TRC's presentation way back a year ago, the cost for the relicensing was $218,000 to $440,000. The cost for surrender was $24,000 to $214,000. So anyway, I don't, if you have your numbers with you, I'd really love for you to bring them out and talk to us about that, because I think that's an important thing. So I'll wrap that up, but I'm interested in, some kind of an agreement if we go forward with a license, because we're going to need it, or else this is going to be a very expensive process, and I'd like to see, this decommissioning plan also put into place as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the UAB. I really was not planning on making any comments this evening, and I will definitely keep this short. On December 9th of 2014, TRC Solutions outlined 5 options available to our community in options number 1 through 5. That report is available on rfcity.org/hydro. And sorry, my name is Michael Page, River Falls City Alderperson at Large. I'm also the president of the Friends of the Kinney organization. At that time, our community chose to pursue option number 1, which was FERC license extension and community planning process with an estimated low cost of $2,000 and an estimated high cost of $223,000. I don't know what the ultimate cost of that decision was. However, I do know today that we've been presented with 3 options, 2 of which I foresee as being viable options for our community. Pursuing an integrated licensing process for another 30-year license for our hydro facility is surely to be the most expensive option for our community, purely because it guarantees in the future we will have to go through a subsequent surrender process, which we could go through just singularly, rather than pursuing a license and then a surrender in the future. The surrender is inevitable. We will be surrendering the license. The question is whether we ask for an extension first and then pursue it in the future, or if we pursue it now. Of those 5 options, we have only been considering 3 tonight because the next least expensive option available to our community in this report that had a low cost of $24,000 and a high cost of $236,000 was surrender, leaving the facilities in place. You just don't get to generate electricity with them anymore. And I appreciate what Bill was saying about the 2016 revenues from the hydro facility. However, I feel that the 2017 numbers really paint a picture for what our hydro facility is going to do this year, what it's going to do next year, what it will do the year after that. And last year, if we had just been buying and selling electricity, we would have made another $2,127. We lost out on $2,127 because we generated electricity ourselves. So continued operation, relicensing, truly the most expensive option our community can pursue. And sorry, I just wanted to give you my 2 thoughts on that because they were requested, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Kent Johnson. I live in Hudson, and I'm a member of the Captuous chapter at Trout Unlimited. We've been actively engaged in lots of issues here with regard to the Kinney, which is one of the primary rivers that we're working on within our chapter's jurisdiction. I had a couple thoughts looking at the recommendations from TRC and listening to the discussion tonight. The first is, my first question is to the Utility Advisory Board and TRC. What do you think is the best recommendation that supports the resolution that the City Council passed in February? And we were all through that process, the River Corridor Committee, the entire community. There was a tremendous amount of passion and energy that the community brought to that decision-making process. So I would like to know, and you don't have to answer it now, of course, which one of those options best reflects the community's decision made in February. The second thing I was a little bit disappointed about was there were no cost estimates related to these options. And I'm also of the opinion that an integrated licensing process is going to be the most expensive process for the city. We know that there'll be studies involved. I was hoping as part of the cost estimates that there would have been a discussion with FERC on their expectations for what types of studies would have been required for each of these 3 options. And I suspect that the surrender option would be the least expensive with regard to studies that FERC would require. We know that dam removal is possible. It's expensive, but the environmental impacts over the years of all types of dam removals have been minimized with the consulting expertise that's out there right now. So I think FERC could be reassured pretty quickly that not a lot of study is going to be needed to remove dams from an environmental studies perspective. So, and then Hal talked, and a couple of the other speakers talked about trust. What ensures that what the community decided in February carries out in 2023?
30 seconds.
And 2035 to 2040. So how do we get there? I was also a little disappointed that there wasn't any discussion tonight about a settlement agreement, which would provide more assurance that the council's resolution and the community's wishes would be met as a part of this process. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Patricia LaRue. I'm a resident of River Falls, and I just want to address real briefly, a second, I hate writing my name like this. the costs that were incurred, and I think Kevin probably knows why I'm up here. Last year in 2016, our cost for running the hydros was $43,000. In 2017, it went up to $112,000. When I saw that, I met with Kevin and Julie, and I asked, how did it go up $70,000 last year? Well, the truth of the matter is that we have paid over $260,000 on the Kinney Corridor consultant. And of that, 50% of it is paid for by the hydro operation under expenses. So if you're comparing what we can buy energy from Whippy versus what we buy energy, you have to assume that Whippy would also pay for half of our Kinney Corridor project. So that $70,000 extra was added above instead of taken out of, and I understand the reason why, but we have this unaudited balance that supposedly the city council said 3 years ago that we're going to set this aside for the hydro project. That was never defined. What is the hydro project? And you would expect that this is the kind of money that was being taken out of it. It's not. It's being taken out of expenses. So just know that of that $260,000, $130,000 of it we've paid for by our ratepayers and the expenses of the hydros.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments? Discussion?
Mr. President, if I may, I'll address, I think, some of the comments that we had here today. First, I want to thank our staff and our consultants because I think we've been doing this the right way. We have asked FERC. You've clearly talked to FERC. And I'm an attorney. I've had some experience with federal agencies. Their minds are not easily changed, and they have an incredible amount of discretion to make entirely wrong-headed decisions. So we know their opinions. Fighting them is a risk that I think would be very expensive. And I see the relicensing project proposal as leaving us in charge. We're not letting FERC or anybody else be in charge, but we can choose to surrender the license whenever we want to. We can choose to jump out of the relicensing process whenever we want to. We can still decide that rather than having, and we can still act in accordance with the resolution, which was a compromise on both sides. And while generating enough revenue to, make some to pay on the hydro project, however that is defined, and also to maintain the facilities. Because if we don't have that, we're going to have to find some other way to pay for maintenance of the dams. I also see a settlement agreement or some kind of an agreement as an issue for the city council. This is a bigger public project than just the UAB. I mean, we're the front lines of this, but this is a bigger community project. So with that, I will move that we as a utility board recommend to the city council that it approve the recommendation of TRC to engage in the integrated licensing process with FERC, with the expectation that future UABs and the City Council act in accordance with the February 27th, 2018 resolution recommending removal of the Powell Falls Dam by 2026 and Junction Falls Dam between 2035 and 2040. Also to be included is an updated report on costs, which would be included in the report to City Council. If I have a second.
I second.
There we go. We can discuss now.
Discussion?
Nothing?
So my understanding that so Kevin mentioned earlier that this really wasn't something that was going in front of the council, and now
it can. We can send it to the council as a board.
Recommending that? So that's what you're recommending?
Yes, I'm recommending that we get it in front of the council because I think that whatever goes forward, the council should weigh in on it.
And I'm totally in favor of what has the community has spoken, and so did the council, and that is the route that was agreed upon. Unless I haven't seen it yet, and I haven't heard about any big push by anybody to change that. So I don't know, I'm kind of sitting back at ease with this choice and the direction that it's going. I guess I don't see any opposition right now. Have you guys seen or heard anything like that? That we got to get rid of the dams quicker, or you know?
Maybe just a couple comments. One, I think I said it kind of in the beginning, was I think all three of the options on the table tonight accomplish the same thing. There are some semantics in there that make people uneasy because you think they're getting played one way or the other. But Diane said that she wants to tie that resolution to future decisions. I think you said that in there. I mean, that's where my heart is. People can't know that, but the goal in all three options to me is the same. One of the commenters said it. The cities came together. We decided we want a free-flowing Kinnickinnic River in River Falls. We all agreed on that. Council voted on that. We gave you three options to get to the to this process to make that happen. And I think Leslie's recommendation is a good recommendation. Whether or not you take it to council, that's entirely up to you on that. So, but I do think this accomplishes what the community desires: a free-flowing Kinnickinnic River. I'm hoping people don't feel distrust. I mean, maybe that just it comes from a natural skepticism that in life, but the goal is a free-flowing Kinnickinnic River by the dates that are outlined in the council resolution. I don't know if that helps or not. That was a little bit of an oratory, I guess.
No, that helps. There's so many people that put so much time into so many committees that work towards this that it'd be really hard to go against that. And I don't feel like that's what this is doing at all. So, does anybody else have anything? All right. Okay. All those in favor of the recommendation, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same.
Aye.
Passes. Recommendation.
And just to be clear, Diane, then in that resolution, you would like us to then take this to city council?
Yes, we, with the recommendation that they accept, from us that they accept.
Very good.
Next item in the packet is the finance report and utility dashboards.
Hello. Hi. As of June 30th of 2018, the electric revenues year-to-date are 6.5 million. This is an increase of 4.8 million kilowatt hours over the same time last year. Expenses for the electric utility were 6.6 million year-to-date. Water revenues were $940,000, which is an increase of 5 million gallons of water, and expenses were $894,000. Wastewater revenue was 1.6 million. Expenses were 1.2 million, resulting in a $413,000 net income. Stormwater revenues are $284,000 and expenses were $286,000. The dashboards are attached, but I wanted to just bring your attention to one of them. The Focus on Energy program one, you'll notice that the ratio is almost 4.5 to 1. And this is because Winfield received their incentive for the new construction design assistance. So that's why that ratio is higher than normal.
I have just one comment I think I should just make you aware of as I'm sitting here thinking related to the dashboards. So the last time we had an electric rate increase was in 2000. And actually, the last time we had a rate study was 2008. So it's been over 10 years. We've commissioned WPPI Energy to do a cost of service study for the electric utility. So we're just in the process of that. So you may see something on a recommendation in the next 3 or 4 months ahead as we, we probably should have gotten to that before 10 years. They recommend every 2 or 3 years to look at rates. We haven't. We're fine. Everything is good, but we are doing a cost of service study, and we'll see what comes out of that. That's just a heads up for future thought.
Does anybody have any questions on those two items? Item number 6 is the monthly utility report.
I don't have anything to add to the report that is not in the report. You know, things are going well. People are staying safe and working hard. So I guess low drama this month. I don't have any big outages to report other than squirrels. And I say this, our customers are getting really good, because I saw over the weekend we had an outage, and the description of the outage was so good as heard a loud bang in the backyard and there was a dead squirrel at the base of the pole. So we're getting people really dialed in on something.
Just assume it's a
couple
squirrel.
squirrel outages, but nothing big.
Does anybody have any announcements at all or questions for Kevin?
Announcements other than just saying thank you for your patience. You know, these topics, this is a hard topic, but I think staying on the road, on the path that was laid out in front of you is wise, and I think it's also wise to have council reflect on that. So thank you for your hard work.
Thank you. For a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We're adjourned.